I'm Rabbi Josh Fixler from Congregation Emanu in Houston, and I'm here to tell you about our civic engagement campaign, which we call EE Votes, or Emmanuel Votes. This all started in about 2019. We were getting some social justice work started at the congregation in a new way using a community organizing model, and so we had some house meetings with congregants trying to understand what were the social justice issues that were closest to their hearts. And one of the messages we heard over and over again was a sense of powerlessness. People would say things like, there's so much injustice in the world and I just don't know what I can do about it, and it doesn't feel like I can do anything about it. And so one of the reasons that we decided to invest in a civic engagement campaign was because we really think it's an answer to that feeling of powerlessness. If you think you don't have something you can do, you do, and it's voting. And we really wanted to increase our congregants' sense of empowerment by reminding them that that's a way they can exercise their voices. It was also a big push in our movement, the movement of Reform Judaism at the time, continues to be, to do civic engagement work. And they set as the goal for congregations that we should use as our tagline that we're trying to become a 100% voting congregation. So that's what we set as our big, hairy, audacious goal. Can we get 100% of our congregants to vote? And the very first time we did this was in 2020. Of course, that was an interesting year and also a really important year to do voter education, and we're proud of the work we did. The very first thing that we needed to do if we were going to say we wanted to become a 100% voting congregation is figure out what percentage of our congregants voted. And so we reached out to a congregant who's also a professor who studies civic engagement, and he helped us do an analysis comparing our congregation's membership rolls to the voter record, which is public information. It's not a difficult process, but you do need to partner with someone who's trained to do it because it's not just accessible to everyone. And I understand that if you reach out to Texas Impact, they can help you to do what we did. So what we learned, looking at the most recent election, which was the midterm election of 2018, first thing we learned is 99.9% of our congregants are registered to vote. The number of congregants who weren't registered to vote was small enough that I could just call the 3 or 4 people. So we had thought maybe we would do some voter registration drives at Temple, and we ended up doing none of that because it turns out if our focus was inside the congregation, 100% effectively of our congregants were already registered. But in the 2018 election, our congregants voted about 3 points below the county average. The Harris County average in that election was 51%. Our congregants voted, 48% of our congregants voted. So while everyone's registered to vote, less than half of our congregants voted in that election and slightly below the county average. So it's true that our goal continues to be becoming a 100% voting congregation, but our actual internal conversation is about how we compare to the county average, because that's a good indication, not just of voter turnout writ large, but about how we're doing in our neighborhood. So in 2020, based on the efforts that I'm going to tell you about, and we really do feel like this made a difference, it was a much higher turnout for the county, but we still beat the county by about 1.5 points. And so we went from voting 3 points below the county average to voting 1.5 points above. We set for ourselves the goal that we would beat the county average by 3 points in 2022. 44% of Houstonians in Harris County voted in 2022, and 49% of congregants at Emmanuel voted. So we continue to improve based on that county average, which is something we're really proud of. And here's how we made that happen. The biggest part of our campaign is during election years is a phone call campaign, congregants calling congregants. The way this works is we'll spend some time in the late summer recruiting congregants who want to be callers. We have a training. No one can be a caller without attending our 1-hour online training. We also do it on Zoom so we can record that training and let anyone who wants to join the process later watch the training. And some of those training materials we can make available through Texas Impact. But we walk everyone through what the phone call is, what questions they might be asking. The question is essentially, do you have a plan to vote? And can I share with you some information about the election? And that information is voting dates, how to find your polling place, etc. All of this, of course, is nonpartisan. None of this is about supporting candidates. All of this is about ensuring that however our congregants vote, that they vote. So we were able to call a couple hundred households in 2020, which was also it's a really important touch point for our congregation. We're a large enough congregation that this isn't something we can do on a regular basis, such that it's really meaningful for folks just to get a phone call from someone they may or may not know in the congregation. In 2020, we targeted congregants 65 and older, and we were able to call all of those households at least once. Once someone attends the training, we give them a list of 10. We took our membership roles, divided them in the list of 10 by age, 10 or 12, something like that, phone numbers. That gets sent to the caller. They call those 10 or 12 people, and then if they want, they can get another list or 2 or 3. And many of our callers, after they've done 10, are feeling excited and fired up. We also have an online reporting form. We ask that they go on and fill out after they make their calls who they called, if there were questions that needed follow-up. We also have a question on that form saying this person probably needs to be contacted by clergy for something else. And I will say in 2020 and 2022, we learned about hospitalizations, we learned about new births, we learned about other exciting and important information we might not have known about, and clergy really benefited from having these phone calls go out to congregations, even though we weren't the ones doing the call. So it's a really important congregational touch point. So in 2020, we focused on congregants 65 and older because it was the pandemic, because we felt like that was the sort of most vulnerable community with the biggest questions about how they were going to vote. In 2022, we were able to, with that professor, look at some of the data about who had voted in 2020. We were able to break that down a little bit more, so not just who voted and who didn't, but also by age. And we discovered actually that people in their 20s and 30s and 40s were the least likely people in our congregation to vote. 65 and older, they find a way to vote because those voting habits are pretty well ingrained. And so in 2022, we were able to dial that in a little bit more, focus on those age groups as well as calling people 65 and older. And we were able to do 500 or 600 calls because we had this core of 30 or 40 volunteers who were really excited to make those calls. So that is a really fun and impactful part of our work. I will tell you the feedback we get from callers is that they enjoy it, but that often people tell them, yes, I'm voting, I already have a plan to vote. We think it's a valuable reminder either way. And the thing I always remind our callers is that statistically speaking, some of the people who said that will end up not voting just because they got busy that day or they forgot or whatever it is. And the biggest indicator of whether or not someone votes is whether they have a specific plan to vote. So we really do believe it is helpful and impactful in making sure that people not just make a plan, but execute it. There's some other things we do as a congregation also, and the other things we do, we're really trying to focus on what are the ways that the congregation is already communicating to people, and how can we insert EE Votes messages into those communications, because we figure those are the places where people are already listening, where we don't have to go out and look for an audience, we already have a built-in audience. So for instance, on Shabbat, our Sabbath, on Friday nights and Saturday mornings when we have worship services here, every week we do announcements about things coming up in the congregation. And so for the month or so of October, our EE Votes committee, we do have a leadership committee of 5 to 10 people who execute all of these amazing activities. And huge credit to them because I could not do it without them. So the committee writes announcements that get put into our Sabbath announcement. So in addition to talking about upcoming programs, there's something each week that says EE Votes would like to remind you to vote, and one piece of useful information. So I believe that this coming week, as I'm recording this, there'll be an announcement in 2023 reminding people that early voting starts the following Monday. So we're trying to give people a timely reminder so that it's not just something that becomes part of the background noise, but something important that they need to know. So we do pulpit announcements. We encourage our clergy to have at least one sermon about voting in the months leading up to the election. We also make sure that there are written materials in our monthly bulletin, in our weekly email. We send 1 or 2 email letters to the congregation over the course of election season. So next week we'll have our one for this 2023 election going out that will remind people of the dates, remind people to vote all the way down the ballot, and a couple other pieces of important information. We learned from this professor that we partnered with that Texas has not only the longest ballots of any place in the country, but also the longest ballots of any democracy in the world. And so a big part of our push is not just to vote, but to vote all the way down ballot, because there are important issues at the end of the ballot. One of the other things we do I think it's much less impactful than the phone calls, but it's still impactful, is we print these voter commitment cards. So when our EE Votes team is tabling, like for instance, they have a table outside of Friday night worship services because those are our best attended services in the weeks leading up to the election. They will give people the opportunity to fill out a card like this that asks them what their plan is to vote, when will they go to vote, what time of day, where will they vote, reminds them a good URL for getting information like a sample ballot. And they write their own address here. And then we will mail this back to them based on when they said they'd vote. So if they said, I'm going to vote early, then right around the beginning of early voting, we'll send this back to them. If they said that they're going to vote on election day, then we'll send this to them about a week before election day. So this is our way of doing the reminding, where we don't have to make the phone call because they've already told themselves how they're going to vote. So it's a cute and useful thing. The front of the postcard has the election dates on it as well. So those are the main ways that we communicate with the congregation. Our goal in 2024 is to look also outside the walls of our congregation and see where are the places in our neighborhood that we can have a meaningful impact. But for us, what we realized when we did that congregational study, when we discovered that in that previous election we had voted 3 points before the county average, is that some of our assumptions were wrong. Our assumption that we might need to do voter registration was wrong. Our assumption that all of our people already voted was wrong. Our assumption that people understood this idea that voting is a Jewish value and that it can feel like a religious commitment. We realized we had a lot of work to do there. So it was really valuable for us to understand better what it was that we were trying to accomplish and what our impact was going to be. And, only 49% of our congregants voted in the last election. This 2023 election, turnout in mayoral elections in off years is very low. I think I looked it up today and it was 16% the last time this happened in 2019. So we've got a lot of work to do, even within our congregation, to make sure that people are fulfilling those commitments and giving people the information they need. And it's also another important way that we are in contact with our congregation. And so it's been transformative for us. I hope it's been transformative for Houston, and we'll continue to do this work until we get to the place where we're 100% voting congregation. So assembling the EE Votes Committee was the first and most important thing we did. The first and most important thing was finding a chair or co-chairs, and finding a chair who had the time, someone who had the time to devote, and a passion for civic engagement. We were lucky to find a couple of really amazing congregants for that. And we started to brainstorm who are the people in our congregation who are interested in politics or who are interested in social justice work, who are the right people for this conversation. We were looking to build a sort of intentionally diverse committee, diverse in terms of age, diverse in terms of sort of the types of work backgrounds. It turned out that our committee was entirely women, so we didn't pull off diversity in that way, but we were looking to build a really diverse group. And once we had the chair, the other important thing we did was ask them, who are your friends who you want to reach out to be on this committee? Because the people most likely to say yes are the people who know the chair. But we ended up with this group where not everyone knew each other. In fact, we figured out everybody didn't know at least one other person at the table. And they really bonded and I think had a transformative experience for them in 2022, particularly as they were designing this work and sort of challenging each other and challenging the congregation to do more. One of the things that's really nice about this as a volunteer opportunity is it's bounded. It's got a start and an end. We know it's going to start start in the spring, really get up and running in the summer, and then we know that by election day, it's essentially done. We have a couple of activities after. We like to do a sort of thank you potluck for all of our callers and volunteers. That's also an opportunity for us to get feedback. We, of course, need to go back to our professor and run the numbers on the new election once the voter data is available. So there's some stuff to do after Election Day, and then we try and get the chairs to write as many notes as they can about what they did so we can capture that as well. But for the most part, people know when it's going to start and when it's going to end, and they know they're not making a life commitment. And so that, I think, has been really valuable as we pitched this as a volunteer opportunity as well. I think the biggest thing is voter turnout amongst American citizens is very low. And that is a obstacle to overcome that we're not going to solve on our own. And we're doing our part to solve that, but it is a part of a much larger, I think, civic conversation. It's why I'm happy Texas Impact is doing this work, so that we can be having this conversation across our city and not just in some isolated places. So that, I think, is a challenge. I think that particularly in the last few years, people are confused how to vote and scared to vote. Certainly that was true in 2020 when there were questions about both what it meant to vote in person and in terms of the health risks, but also what it meant if you used some of the alternatives that Harris County made available. Would your vote get counted? I always tell a story that I think is really powerful. We did a session on Yom Kippur. Oh, I didn't even mention that. We did a session on Yom Kippur in 2022, which is the holiest day of the Jewish calendar year. And in the afternoon, we had something we called the EE Votes Expo, where people could come and experience one of the new Harris County Texas voting machines. People could check their voter registration status, could check and see their voter history. We had a whole bunch of tables. And someone was there, one of our caller volunteers, and she realized that she hadn't signed her college-age daughter up to have a vote by mail ballot, which she was eligible for. And she was going to fill out that form on behalf of her daughter, or get her daughter to fill out the form. I can't remember. I don't know if you can fill it out on behalf of someone else. But and then she just decided to book a plane ticket home. And I don't think that was just about another chance to see her daughter. I think she was more trusting of the airlines to get her daughter home than she was trusting of the Texas voter system to count that absentee ballot. And so I think that people are really scared that their vote's not going to get counted. And I think that that is a really challenging thing to overcome. There's a lot of inertia there, and there's a lot of fear there. Another challenge that we encountered is we have these callers who are really fired up and excited. And one of the things we learned in our first campaign that we made a part of our training for the next election 2 years later is that we need to create some clear boundaries about how much they can call a person, because we had some folks who were so excited. They really wanted to reach someone, so they called 2 or 3 or 4 times when they didn't get through, because out of the goodness of their heart, they really thought it was important. And so we've started to really remind people that actually the voicemail does do just almost as much good, because they're still going to hear from the congregation. They're still going to hear our top line message. They're still going to know they can reach out if they have questions. And so we're really trying to limit our callers to like 1 phone call and 1 text message, because one of the pieces of feedback that we got from the congregation was that some people felt like folks were really after them. The other thing that we learned in that first campaign, and it's been less of an issue every time we've done EE votes, is that folks were really skeptical about whether or not this was actually nonpartisan. Folks assumed that we had an agenda. Folks assumed that we had a particular way we wanted them to vote. And we have done a lot of work to make it clear in every piece of communication. The word nonpartisan appears in the first sentence or the top banner. We really want it to be clear that this is about folks using their voice and exercising their civic duty, and we are not engaged in who or what they vote for as much as we are engaged in the work of getting them to the polls.